It's about 52,463, and we have covered for about 49,000, and that's a higher response rate than the 2018. We have 93.5%. For the individuals, we have 209,527 eligible individuals, and out of that, we have covered 165,586, and that's equivalent to a response rate of 79%. So what and how are the data collected? So for the ENNS, ito yung full ENNS na lahat ng mga components, no? So for the anthropometry, it's a measure of the physical growth and body composition. That's for the mid-upper arm, waist, and hip circumferences. So we collected this to determine the prevalence of underweight, underheight, thinness, and overweight and obesity. So this was presented last year, the results. And for the biochemical, selected lang yung i-present namin ngayon, no, for the results. So we collected the blood and urine samples to assess prevalence of vitamin A deficiency, we have anemia, and other nutrient deficiencies. For the clinical and health component, we assess the prevalence of elevated blood pressure, high fasting blood glucose, and dyslipidemia, as well as the behavioral risk factors. So these are smoking, alcohol consumption, physical inactivity, and unhealthy diet. So we measure the blood pressure of the individuals. Then we also collect blood, and we have some face-to-face interview for the behavioral risk factors. For the dietary, which will be presented later on, they will elaborate on this, the methodology of this component. For the food security, the government program, and the socioeconomic, we have a face-to-face interview. So we, for the food security, we assess the status at the household level, as well as the coping mechanisms and strategies. For the government program participation, we assess the households and members' participation in selected nutrition and related programs. For the socioeconomic characteristics of households, we profile the households in terms of education and occupation of the household members, their type of housing unit, and the type of wall, roof, and ownership of different types of appliances. So information on households' assets are also used for the construction of wealth index as a surrogate measure for household income. Then for the IYCF, for the infant and young child feeding, and the maternal health and nutrition, we utilize the questionnaires using face-to-face interview to update the information on feeding practices of the children 0 to 23 and other related factors affecting the feeding practices. And we also determine the health and nutrition of mothers with children 0 to 3 years old, their health-seeking behaviors and caregiving practices. So that's the method of the full ENNS. So this afternoon, the selected biochemical markers and the dietary will be reported for this day, for the whole day. So we use the survey results to address nutrition problems by crafting policies and interventions. It is also used for planning, targeting, and implementing nutrition and related intervention programs, goals, and other commitments. And this is also used for monitoring and evaluation of impact of nutrition intervention programs. We also use the results as a tool in advocacy for policy development or directions. Then we also address nutrition problems by crafting policies and interventions. So ito po yung mga batas na gumamit ng mga survey results kasi sabi nga natin evidence-based. So we have the Micronutrients supplementation, the Philippine Fortification Act of 2000. We have the ASIN law, Republic Act 10351, or the syntax law, the school feeding law. We have the first 1,000 days law, the national policies on infant and young children, or the administrative order number 2005-0014. We also use this for the Sustainable Development Goal, Philippine Development Plan, Philippine Plan of Action, and the Food Fortification Program. Okay, so the salient features of the NNS and the ENNS. So this is just a brief comparison between the old design and the new survey design. So the NNS is a one-shot survey every 5 years, while the ENNS is a rolling survey for 3 years. For the updating survey, we have a one-shot survey every 2.5 years within the 5 years of NNS. So for the ENNS, no need to conduct this because this is already covered for in the rolling survey. In terms of sampling design, the NNS uses the 2003 master sample, while the ENNS, we use the 2013 master sample. And in terms of coverage, the NNS has 17 regions and 80 provinces. But for the ENNS, the same 17 regions, but this time 117 na yung domain. So that's broken down into 81 provinces, 33 highly urbanized cities, and the 3 other areas. That's the Cotabato City, we have Pateros, and Isabela City in Basilan. Then in terms of replicates, the NNS has 4 replicates, but for the ENNS, we have 16. In terms of number of households, the sample households for the NNS is 40 to 50,000. For the ENNS, it's about 180,000 sample households, an average of 1,536 sample households per province. So that's about 60,000 sample every year. No? For the level of disaggregation, we have national and regional for the NNS, but for the ENNS, from the national, we will be able to generate the provincial level domains estimates. Yeah. Okay, so yun po yung salient features. Now, on the updates of the ENNS, the COVID-19 pandemic has greatly affected the conduct of ENNS. So as I've mentioned before, the data collection for the 3rd year, that's supposed to be last year, was discontinued. So that's only 2 years of the 3-year collection periods were surveyed. So it's 2/3 of the assigned areas. Then for tracking the trends of nutrition and health indicators collected in the ENNS, the 2018 and the 2019 results are pooled to increase the level of precision. And the pooled estimates of the ENNS, these are comparable to the 2015 and the 2013 estimates. And for the remaining areas for the 3rd year of the rolling design, and the 2019 areas will be surveyed this coming June 2021 to gather the data that will be used to determine the possible effects of the pandemic on the health and nutrition status of the Filipino population. Okay, so with that, thank you very much.
So, natapos po tayo sa first part ng lecture ni Ms. Beth Dasco. So, it's about the methodology for the expanded National Nutrition Survey. So, later po, Ms. Dasco will be joining us so we can ask questions po directly from her po. So, we can ask questions po, but later on po, after all the lectures, all the resource speaker will join us. Okay? So, katulad po ng mga ginawa natin the previous 2 days ay magkakaroon po ulit tayo ng maikling question and answer portion, and you will have a 100 peso load again if na-answer nyo po ng tama yung ating question. So, at this time po, please raise your hand na lang po and then I will call you kung sino po yung unang nag-raise hand po sa. Okay. So, ang ating question po, please give one component of the Expanded National Nutrition Survey. So, one component of the Expanded National Nutrition Survey po. So, sino po ang pwedeng magbigay ng isang component ng ENNS o yung mga datang kinokollect po during the Expanded National? Okay. Ma'am Marigold, i-unmute po kita, ma'am. Hello, ma'am. Yes. Ay, nasan yun? Si Ma'am Marigold. Si Ma'am Marigold po yung unang Yan, ma'am. Hello po. Ma'am, can you unmute yourself po, ma'am?
Hello, good morning po.
Yes po, good morning, ma'am. Ano po ang isang component ng ENNS natin?
One component is anthropometric po.
Okay po, thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, alamin ko lang po, ano pong profession nila, ma'am?
Nutritionist dietitian, ma'am.
Okay, and di po, from what province po, ma'am?
South Cotabato.
Ayan, hello po sa
Hello
mga
po.
taga South Cotabato. Thank you po for joining us, no? So talaga namang kahit may pandemic, meron pa ring konting advantages ito kasi nakaka-join tayo ng mas madaming webinar. Thank you po, Ma'am Marigold. Ma'am, i-message niyo po si Miss Jane Sune ng DOST-FNRI para po sa inyong load po. Thank you po. So tama po si Ma'am Marigold, no? So ang una component po is anthropometry. So weight, height measurement, weight circumference. Actually, madami pong component yun. A is for anthropometric, B is for biochemical, C is for clinical survey, D is for dietary survey, sunod po, E is for socioeconomic, F for food security, G for government program participation, tapos yung H po natin is yung sa health-related question, and yung I po natin is yung IYCF practices. So lahat po yun, inaalam po natin o kinokollect po natin yung data sa ENNS. So thank you po, ma'am, for your answer. So now, let's go now to the second lecture po, which is the food consumption po at the household level. So our second speaker is a registered nutritionist dietitian, obtained her BS Nutrition from UPLB, and her MS in Food Science and Nutrition from University of Ghent, Belgium. She also obtained her PhD in Human Nutrition from University of the Philippines, Los Baños. She has expertise in IYCF and Dietary Assessment and involved in the conduct of the National Nutrition Survey. Let's all welcome po our Senior Science Research Specialist, Dr. Eva A. Guyena, for her lecture on food consumption survey at the household level.
So my presentation is a focus on the food consumption result or at the household level. And please note that we have two-level dietary data in the expanded NNS. The household level, which I'm going to present, and the other one is the individual level dietary information, which will be presented by my colleague, Ms. Desnacido, after this presentation. So the dietary assessment is one of the 9 survey components of the expanded NNS to comprehensively assess the nutritional status of Filipinos. The other 8 are anthropometrics, biochemical parameters or the biomarkers, clinical, food security, government programs, maternal, infant and young child feeding, along with socio-demographic and economic characteristics of the households. Primarily, the food consumption information at the household level is conducted to evaluate the current food intake of individuals in the households, to reflect the food available at the household level, examines the trends and changes in food availability and consumption over time, and to monitor the trends in the proportion of households meeting energy adequacy as input to track the country's progress in achieving the SDG goal on zero hunger. Why do we need to assess the food consumption at the household level? First, food consumption survey of the FNRI serves as the official statistical source of nationally representative data on food and nutrient intakes in the Philippines. Second, dietary assessment helps identify public health concerns from inadequate to excess consumption. Third, it provides insights on the changing dietary pattern of the population. And last, it aids in the policy and program development for poverty alleviation, food security, and health and nutrition strategies of the government and private organizations. So how do we collect food consumption data at the household level? So our trained nutritionist dietitians conduct one-day food weighing of all foods in as purchased or raw form before these foods are cooked for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Likewise, beginning and ending inventories of all non-perishable foods such as rice, coffee, sugar, milk, salt, and others are taken alongside food weighing. Then food recall is also done to account all foods eaten outside the home by any household members during the food weighing day. So all this information gathered from these three methods are aggregated or taken together to generate the total amount of foods eaten by all household members. So how do we analyze the household dietary data? So after a series of manual editing, machine validation, computer validation, the household dietary data is analyzed using the what we call HDES or the Household Dietary Evaluation System. HDES is a computer software used to convert all weights of food to as purchased weight in grams or raw form. Then the actual food consumed by the household is derived after deducting the leftover, given out food, and plate waste from the food weight. And then how do we estimate the energy and nutrient intake of each household? We use the expanded food composition table intended for the survey data, dietary data. So the values generated from the HDES were compared to PDRI 2015 to assess if the household is meeting or not the recommended energy and nutrient intakes. So as mentioned earlier by Ms. Dasco, the dietary component of the ENNS covered half of the total target households, which is the same coverage that of the biochemical component because of the high cost needed in the data collection, specifically on the personnel to conduct food weighing. So household members responsible in the food preparation were the respondents of this survey component. So for the dietary survey component of the ENNS, we covered 20,326 households in 2018 and 21,093 households in 2019 with a total of 41,419 households covered in these two periods, giving us an overall response rate of 73.5%. So that's for the coverage. Now let's proceed to the results of the food consumption survey at household level in 2018 and 2019 periods. Results revealed that the mean food intake in a day of Filipino households was 3,021 grams, again showing rice, fish, vegetables as the most consumed foods among the households, with 35.2% coming from rice, 11.2% from fish, dun sa mga may blue box, and 16% from vegetables in the 2018 and 2019 survey periods. Merge po yung 2018-2019 ENS. Among the other key food groups, we can see here that meat and meat products contributed 7% of the total household food intake, and these were consumed at 214 grams per day on average. Poultry was consumed at 113 grams per day, and contributed 4% to the total food intake. Eggs consumed at 82 grams it's contributing 3% of the total intake. Milk and milk products at 188 grams per day is 6% of the total household food intake. Fruits at 182 grams contributed 4% of the total food intake. Then root crops and tubers, beans and nuts and sugars and syrups, dito po, were the least consumed by the households at only 1% of the total food intake. Then miscellaneous foods, which include all kinds of beverages and condiments, had 4% contribution to the total food intake. So this slide shows a decrease in the mean daily food intake of households in the recent 2018 and 2019 at 3,021 grams as compared to the 3,400 grams mean intake of households in 2015. So breaking this total food intake by food groups, the mean consumption of rice and products, corn and products, and other cereal products shown in the lower portion of the bar in beige color po, this one, as well as root crops, here, yung brown ding maliit doon sa taas, shaded in brown nga, have declined between 2015 and 2018-2019 periods. Similarly, mean intake of fish, meat, and poultry among the households was lower in the 2018-2019 survey periods at 665 grams per day here, as compared with the 2015 intake of these foods at 740 grams per day, though consumption of this food group is similarly proportioned at about 22% between 2015 and 2018 and 2019 period po. So milk and milk products intake in light blue has slightly increased from 175 grams in 2015 to 188 grams in 2018 and 19. Also eggs in beige color here recorded an increased consumption between 2015 at 71 grams, 82 grams in 2018 and 2019. Fats and oils, sugars and sweets in the tea part of the stock bar have almost the same percentage contribution to the total food intake between 2015 and in the recent 2018 and 2019. Between rural and urban areas, the mean daily food intake did not differ at 3,030 grams and 3,006 grams in rural and urban areas respectively. Consumption of rice and cereals, including root crops and tubers, sugars and syrups, vegetables and fruits, shown in this slide were slightly higher among rural than urban households, while urban households have higher mean intake of the protein-rich foods, which include fish, meat, poultry in blue color, eggs shaded in beige, and milk products in light blue, as compared to the rural households in 2018 and 2019. Mean consumption of dried beans, yung nasa taas po, blue color, nuts and legumes and miscellaneous foods in violet color, were almost the same between urban and rural households. Difference in the intake of major food groups is also noted across wealth quintile. Intake of, as you can see in the slide, intake of rice and cereals was higher among the poorest and poor households at 1,269 grams versus 1,105 grams um, among the richest households in 2018 and 19, while the intake of protein-rich foods, which include fish, meat, poultry, eggs, milk, and legumes, in pink color po, was twice higher among the richest income group at 1,383 grams, that of the poorest income group at 616 grams. Intake of fats and oils in yellow increase as wealth status increases, while consumption of fruits and vegetables in green color and is almost similar across wealth quintile. In terms of food sources at the household level, there's an almost 10 percentage point increase in the contribution of animal source food to the total food intake. From 22.4% in 2018, it went up to 31.2% in 2018 and 19, while plant sources in green shade decreased. The contribution of plant source food decreased in 2018 and 2019 at 68.5 as compared po dun sa 72.8% in 2015. So this slide shows the sources of energy at households. So the energy coming from carbohydrates, in green, protein, blue, and fats did not differ between 2015 and 2019, of which about 69% of the total energy intake of households comes from carbohydrates, 12 to 13% from protein, and 18 to 19% from fats. In terms of energy and nutrient adequacy in the Filipino diets, results revealed that only 2 in every 10 households, or 23.5%, meet the energy requirement in a day, while about 6 in every 10 households meet the protein requirement per day in the 2018-19 periods. So among the micronutrients, niacin or vitamin B3 has the highest percentage of households meeting the adequacy at 8 in every 10 households meet 100% adequacy of this nutrient in 2018 and 19. Next, vitamin A, riboflavin, B2 were met by only 2 out of 10 households in 2018 and 19, while 3 in every 10 households met the B1 or thiamine adequacy. Next, the proportion of household meeting vitamin C, calcium, and iron recommendations were low, an indication that these nutrients are inadequately provided by the average consumption pattern observed in Filipino households. So the mean one-day food intake of households, mean one day in grams, has decreased as shown in the previous slides, and so the corresponding energy and nutrient intake also decreased. So this slide shows the proportion of households meeting the required energy and the estimated average requirement for selected nutrients. So between 2015 and 2018-19, the proportion of households meeting the required energy decreased at 23.5% compared to the 31% proportion of meeting the energy requirement in 2015. Similarly, the proportion of households meeting protein requirements slightly reduced in 2018 and 19 at 57.6%. Particularly revealing is vitamin C and iron. Households meeting vitamin C, this one, sa red po, is twice less in 2018 and 19 at 15.3% than in 2015 at 32.5%. Iron remains to be a problematic nutrient among the Filipino households. Also, a decrease in the proportion of households meeting the requirement of thiamine, calcium, and vitamin A is observed in 2015 and 2019. Between rural and urban areas, the proportion of households meeting energy was slightly higher in rural than urban areas. There were more rural households who achieved 100% of the vitamin C adequacy at 16.5% and calcium adequacy at 14.2%, that of the urban households. So highlighted earlier was the higher intake of meat, fish, poultry among urban households. Kaya consistently, more urban households were able to meet the dietary requirement of protein and B vitamins than that of the rural households. While both in urban and rural areas, iron and vitamin A requirements were met by a small proportion of households. So this slide shows the mean per capita food intake and mean per capita energy intake in a day. So the amount of food in grams indicated by blue line shows a decreasing trend since 2003, and correspondingly, the mean per capita intake of energy decreased from the 1,865 calories. Yes, this one, 1,865 calories in 2015 to 1,716 kilocalories in 2018 and 19. This one is the trends in the daily per capita intake of the major food groups among Filipino households. If we look at the energy-giving foods, decrease were noted in the per capita intake of rice, denoted by yellow line, cereals in blue line, and root crops in dark blue, while fats while fats and oils by denoted in violet line remain similar since 2008. Here po. The per capita intake of sugars and syrups in green line po shows a declining trend since 2003. In here, a decreasing trends in the per capita consumption of fish and products, meat and products po, has been observed since 2013, while poultry in orange line has increased over the years. This one, sa orange line. So the per capita intake of milk in green line is fluctuating over the years, though an increase is observed between 2015 and the 2018-19 survey periods. The per capita intake of eggs in pink line is increasing, while dried beans and nuts in brown line has been decreasing over the years. Next here, the per capita consumption of vegetables shows an increasing trend, while fruit consumption in orange reveals a decreasing trend over the past years. We also have data on household food waste, which is comprised of cooked and raw food items that the households did not consume, possibly because of spoilage, waste during cooking or preparation, and also plate waste. So based on the 2018 and 2019 results, the average plate waste in a day is 77 grams, or about 5 tablespoons. And seemingly, the higher consumed food group, which is the rice and cereals, had the largest amount of wastage among the households at 56.5 grams, followed by fish, meat, poultry, and vegetables at 8 grams. So that's all for the food consumption survey results of the 2018-2019 ENNS. So in summary, we can say that 1, dietary pattern of Filipino households remained a combination of rice, fish, and vegetables. 2, there are changes in the household food consumption wherein an increase is observed in the mean intake of eggs, milk and products, and miscellaneous food items, while a decreased mean intake is observed in rice and cereals, meat, poultry, fruits, and vegetables. 3rd, majority of the Filipino households did not receive 100% energy and nutrient adequacy. Then, rural households have higher intakes of rice and products, root crops and tubers, sugars and syrups, vegetables and fruits than urban households. Urban households have, on the other hand, have a higher intakes of fish, meat, poultry, eggs, milk and milk products, including dried beans and nuts than rural households. Then last, poor households have higher intake of carbohydrate-rich foods that include cereals and products, while rich households have higher intake of protein-rich foods than their counterparts. So that ends my presentation. Maraming salamat. Thank you.
Okay, thank you po, Ma'am Guyena, for our second lecture. So, Ma'am Guyena discussed about the household consumption po ng Filipino population. So, napag-alaman po natin yung common na kinakain ng mga household dito po sa Pilipinas. Okay? So, okay pa po ba tayong lahat? Okay, if yes po, we will go to our second question po. Ay ba, may nakataas na ng kakamay. Okay, lower hand po muna natin yung kamay ni Ma'am Cesare. Yan. Okay, for our next question. Ito pong question na to, kailangan nakinig po talaga kayo ng mabuti sa lecture ni Ma'am Guyena para po inyong masagutan po talaga. Okay? So our next question. What are the 3 methods used in household dietary data collection in ENNS? Ayan, si Ma'am Cesare pa rin po. So Ma'am, I will unmute you po. Ma'am Cisa, ano po yung 3 methods na binanggit po ni Ma'am Guyena for household dietary data collection? You can unmute po, Ma'am.
Unmute. Hello po, good morning.
Yes, Ma'am. Ma'am, ano pong profession po natin, Ma'am?
Professional educator po, DepEd.
Sure. Okay.
Yes,
Hello
po.
po. Madami po tayong taga-DepEd na uma-attend nitong mga webinars po natin. So, masaya po kami na kasama po namin kayo sa webinar na ito. So,
thank you din po.
opo, anong location po natin, Ma'am?
Pangasinan to po.
Ayan, Pangasinan. So, hello po sa mga taga-Pangasinan. So, ano pong answer sa ating question?
Mga household dietary data collection, food inventory, one-day food weighing, and food recall.
Wow, Ma'am. Thank you so much po sa answer nyo. Tama po lahat. Ayan, masaya po kami for parang kasi pag endis po sanay po dito sa mga dietary data collection. Pero pag teachers for other profession, ayan, masaya po kami talagang nakikinig si Ma'am. Ma'am Cesare, thank you so much po. Thank you. So, please message po Miss Jane Sune po of DOST-FNRI for your 100 peso load po. So, sa lahat po ng nanalo, please give us at least 14 days po to process po your load po or prices po. Thank you po, Ma'am Cesare. Sana po madami pa pong mga teachers na katulad nyo ang talagang natututo po dito po sa ating mga webinars po. And sana po magamit nyo po sa inyong pagtuturo ang mga natututunan po natin dito sa webinar. Thank you po, Ma'am Cesare. Yan. Okay po. So now we go now to our, I think this is our last lecture for today. Okay, so our next speaker is also a registered nutritionist dietitian. Obtain her BS Nutrition and MS Applied Nutrition from University of the Philippines, Los Baños. She also has expertise in dietary assessment research and involved in the conduct of the expanded national nutrition survey. So to discuss about the food consumption at the individual level based on the result of the ENNS, please welcome Science Research Specialist 2, Ms. Josie Platon Destasido. Ma'am Josie, take away the virtual floor.
Thank you for listening. Good morning, everyone. So in the previous presentation, Dr. Guiana presented the results of the food consumption survey at the household level. And now I'm going to present the food and nutrient intakes of individuals across the different population groups. So the individual food consumption survey provides data on the intake, food quantities, and nutrient adequacies of the different population groups. So the individual food consumption survey is part of the ENNS. It provides information vital for shaping food and health guidelines, for planning and evaluating programs, for understanding consumption patterns, in developing strategies for health promotion and disease prevention, and to track progress in addressing SDG targets by 2030, particularly the goal number 2 and number 3. Okay, so for the methods, I'm going to discuss briefly how we conduct the individual food consumption survey of the ENNS. Okay, so this slide shows the coverage by population groups. So the individual food consumption survey covered all the age groups, namely the young children, the school-age children, the adolescents, adults, elderly, pregnant women, and lactating mothers. So a total of 80,540 individuals were covered for the 2018 ENNS, while a total of 84,685 individuals were covered for the 2019 ENNS. So for the combined of full 2018 to 2019, a total of 165,225 individuals were covered. So for the coverage and response rates of 2018 to 2019 ENNS, so among population groups, so the response rate ranged from 69.3 to 89%. So lowest response rate was noted among adults, while highest response rate was reported from lactating mothers. So all in all, the response rate is 75.7%. So a total of 165,225 individuals was covered in 2018 to 2019. And this was disaggregated by population groups based on the Philippine Dietary Reference Intakes, or PDRI. So for the method of data collection, at 2 non-consecutive days, 24-hour food recall was used to estimate the individual's food intake. So all members of the sampled households were interviewed to collect data for the first 24-hour food recall. And then for the second day recall, only 50% of the randomly selected households with 1-day recall were interviewed. So it involved a face-to-face interview where food consumed by an individual for the past 24 hours were recalled and recorded. So respondents were asked to remember and record exactly all foods and beverages they actually consumed during the past 24-hour period using the measuring tools like cups, tablespoons, matchbox, or by size and number of pieces, and these are converted into grams or millimeters for analysis. So for data processing, a computer system called Individual Dietary Evaluation System, or IDES, developed by FNRI, was used to evaluate the energy and nutrient content of foods consumed by each individual subject. So this system contains the data of the expanded Filipino food composition table. So for the analysis, the mean and usual intake distributions of nutrients were estimated by using the pesticide software. So the method adjusts daily intakes to remove the effect of intra-individual variability. Therefore, the estimated distribution only reflects between person variability in intake. In computing for total dietary intake, so this should be noted. So dietary and food supplements are not accounted in the total dietary intake of individuals, but included in a separate study. So breast milk is not also included in the analysis of the total dietary intake of infants and young children. And now, so let's proceed to the results of the individual food consumption survey of the 2018 to 2019 ENNS. First, I'm going to present the contribution of each major food group to the total mean one-day food intake across population groups. So looking at the intakes of infants 6 to 11 months, young children 1 to 2 years old, and preschool children 3 to 5 years old. So as we can see in the slides, the values at the top represent the average total food intake in a day. So each color in the graph represents the specific food groups. So for the infants 6 to 11 months, milk and milk products represented by yellow bar, and rice and other cereal products represented by light orange bar at the bottom constituted the highest share of the food intake for this age group. While among 1 to 2 years old, rice and other cereal products, followed by milk and milk products, and fish, meat, and poultry contributed the most of the food consumed by young children 1 to 2 years old in a day. While for 3 to 5 years old, consumption of rice and other cereal products provided about half of the daily food intake of this age group. About 17% of the total intake per day was contributed by fish, meat, and poultry, and less than 10% came from milk and milk products. So fruits and vegetables contributed less than 5% of their total intake in a day. So translating into actual food intake, so among young children 6 to 24 months, okay, so 97.7% are consuming cereal and cereal products, wherein 88.8% consume rice and products with mean intake of 62 grams per day, which is equivalent to 3/4 cup of boiled rice per day, or 2 cups of porridge or lugaw. 63.9% are consuming milk and milk products with mean intake of 66 grams per day, which is equivalent to 1/3 glass of milk per day. 52.7% are consuming fish, meat, and poultry with mean intake of 23 grams per day. So 30.8% consume fish and products with mean intake of 8 grams per day, which is equivalent to less than 1/2 piece of fried small fish per day. For fruits, 8.8% are consuming with mean intake of 6 grams per day, which is equivalent to less than 1/4 of fruit per day. So imagine natin yung isang pirasong saging na lakatan, so halos wala pang 1/4 ang nakakain. So for vegetables, 28.3% are consuming. So with mean intake of 7 grams per day, which is equivalent to less than 1/4 cup of green leafy and non-leafy vegetables per day. So the actual intake of preschool children, 3 to 5 years old, so as we can see in the slide, so 99.7% are consuming cereals and cereal products, wherein 95.1% consume rice and products with mean intake of 106 grams per day, which is equivalent to 1 1/4 cups of boiled rice per day. So 47.4% are consuming milk and milk products, with mean intake of 29 grams per day. So this is equivalent to 1/8 glass of milk per day. 81.5% are consuming fish, meat, and poultry with mean intake of 56 grams per day, wherein 49.5% consume fish and products with mean intake of 19 grams per day, which is equivalent to more than 1 piece of fried small fish per day. So for fruits, 12.2% are consuming with mean intake of 11 grams per day, which is equivalent to less than 1/4 small size of fruit per day. So for vegetables, 42.3% are consuming with mean intake of 14 grams per day, which is equivalent to less than 1/4 cup of green leafy and non-leafy vegetables. So looking at the intakes of school-age children, adolescents, and adults, so as we can see in the slide, rice and other cereal products contributed to half of their mean one-day food intake. 20% was from fish, meat, and poultry, while other food groups like fruits and vegetables contributed less than 10% of their total intake in a day. Consumption of milk and milk products was even more unpopular for these age groups, providing less than 3% of their total daily food intake. So translating into actual food intake, so now let's take a look at the actual food intake of school-age children 6 to 12 years old. 100% of school-age children are consuming cereal and cereal products, wherein 95.8% consume rice and products with mean intake of 179 grams per day, which is equivalent to 2 and 1/4 cups of boiled rice per day. 89.8% are consuming fish, meat, and poultry with mean intake of 91 grams per day. 54.9% consume fish and products with mean intake of 29 grams per day, and this is equivalent to less than 2 pieces fried small fish per day. 46.8% consume meat and products with mean intake of 43 grams per day, which is equivalent to less than 1 matchbox size of boiled pork per day. So for fruits, 14.5% are consuming with mean intake of 15 grams per day, which is equivalent to 1/4 small size of fruit per day. For vegetables, 49.4% are consuming with mean intake of 22 grams per day, which is equivalent to 1/4 cup of green leafy and less than 1/4 cup of non-leafy vegetables per day. Let's see the actual food intake of adolescents. So 99.9% of adolescents are consuming cereal and cereal products, wherein 95.7% consume rice and products with mean intake of 261 grams per day, which is equivalent to 3 and 1/4 cups of boiled rice per day. 92.2% are consuming fish, meat, and poultry, wherein 57.3% consume fish and products with mean intake of 40 grams per day, which is equivalent to more than 2 pieces of fried small fish per day. 50.2% consume meat and products with mean intake of 59 grams per day, that corresponds to more than 1 matchbox size of boiled pork per day. So for fruits, 14.5% are consuming with mean intake of 16 grams per day, which is equivalent to 1/4 small size of fruit per day. For vegetables, so 56.4% are consuming with mean intake of 36 grams per day, which is equivalent to less than 1 cup of green leafy and non-leafy vegetables per day. Now, let's take a look at the food intake of adults. So 99.9% of adults are consuming cereals and cereal products, wherein 95.9% consume rice and products with mean intake of 271 grams per day, which is equivalent to 3 and 1/4 cups of boiled rice per day. 93.9% are consuming fish, meat, and poultry, with mean intake of 131 grams per day, wherein 67.3% consume fish and products with mean intake of 53 grams per day, which is equivalent to 3 pieces of fried small fish per day. 45.8% consume meat and products with mean intake of 53 grams per day that corresponds to more than 1 matchbox size of boiled pork per day. So for fruits, 16.9% are consuming with mean intake of 21 grams per day, which is equivalent to 1/2 small size of fruit per day. While for vegetables, 70.2% are consuming with mean intake of 58 grams per day, which is equivalent to less than 1 cup of green leafy and non-leafy vegetables per day. Okay, so among elderly, pregnant, and lactating mothers, so as we can see in the slide, rice and other cereal products had the highest share of the total daily food intake. Consumption of fish, meat, and poultry provided less than 20% of the total intake. For vegetables and fruits, so this accounted for less than 12 and less than 6% to the total daily intake respectively. So modest amounts were consumed among other food groups, including milk and milk products, starchy roots and tubers, fats and oils, and dried beans, nuts, and seeds. Okay, so let's see the actual food intake of elderly. So 99.9% of elderly are consuming cereal and cereal products, wherein 95.2% consume rice and products with mean intake of 203 grams per day, which is equivalent to 2.5 cups of boiled rice per day. 90.7% are consuming fish, meat, and poultry with mean intake of 98 grams per day. 72.2% consume fish and products with mean intake of 53 grams per day. So this is equivalent to 3 pieces of fried small fish per day. 33.5% consume meat and products with mean intake of 30 grams per day. So this is equivalent to more than 1/2 matchbox size of boiled pork per day. So in terms of fruits, 19.3% are consuming with mean intake of 24 grams per day. So this is equivalent to 1/2 small size of fruit per day. For vegetables, 69.7% are consuming vegetables with mean intake of 58 grams per day, which is equivalent to less than 1 cup of green leafy and non-leafy vegetables per day. So for the actual food intake of pregnant women, 99.9% of pregnant women are consuming cereal and cereal products, wherein 95.7% consume rice and products with mean intake of 235 grams per day. So this is equivalent to less than 3 cups of boiled rice per day. 92.3% are consuming fish, meat, and poultry with mean intake of 111 grams per day. So 67.5% are consuming fish and products with mean intake of 44 grams per day. So this is equivalent to more than 2 pieces fried small fish per day. 42.9% consume meat and products with mean intake of 45 grams per day. So this is equivalent to less than 1 matchbox size of boiled pork per day. So for fruits, 23% are consuming with mean intake of 35 grams per day. So this is equivalent to more than 1/2 small size of fruit per day. So in terms of vegetables, 71.2% are consuming with mean intake of 55 grams per day. So this is equivalent to less than 1 cup of green leafy and non-leafy vegetables per day. Okay, so let's take a look at the food intake of lactating mothers. 99.8% of lactating mothers are consuming cereals and cereal products, wherein 95.7% consume rice and products with mean intake of 282 grams per day. So this is equivalent to 3.5 cups of boiled rice per day. 90% are consuming fish, meat, and poultry with mean intake of 109 grams per day. So 63.4% are consuming fish and products with mean intake of 45 grams per day, which is equivalent to more than 2 pieces of fried small fish per day. 41.5% consume meat and products with mean intake of 43 grams per day, which is equivalent to less than 1 matchbox size of boiled pork per day. So in terms of fruits, 13.9% are consuming with mean intake of 16 grams per day. So this is equivalent to less than 1/2 small size of fruit per day. In terms of vegetables, so 71.3% are consuming with mean intake of 58 grams per day. So this is equivalent to less than 1 cup of green leafy and non-leafy vegetables per day. Okay, so now let's take a look at the energy intake and adequacy across population groups. So translating this food intake into energy intake, so as we can see in the slide, the blue bar at the bottom represents the actual mean energy intake, which is the average amount of energy consumed by the subject from all the foods that they have consumed in a day. So the green bar is the estimated energy requirements, or the EER, which is the daily energy intake level that meets the requirements of half of the healthy and normal weight individuals in a particular life stage or sex. So this is based on calculations taking into considerations the individual's energy intake, the energy expenditure, the age, the sex, the weight, the height, and the physical activity level. While the red bar represents the recommended energy intake, or the REI. So this is the daily energy intake level, which is considered adequate for the maintenance of health and well-being of almost all of the healthy persons in the population. So the graph shows that mean energy intake of all population groups was inadequate based on the REI and EER. So we know that breast milk contributed to the energy intake of young children, particularly 6 to 11 months and 1 to 2 years old. However, breast milk was not accounted in the individual food consumption survey. Now let's take a look at the food sources of total energy intake. So this top 5 food sources was based on the percent contribution of the food intake to the total food intakes. So as we can see in the slide, so among children and adolescents, rice, which is the primary staple food of the Filipinos, was the top food source of total energy intake. So aside from rice, milk was included as a top food source of energy among children 6 months to 5 years old. Among school-age children and adolescents, aside from rice, pork, cooking oil, and corn grits were included in the top source of total energy intake. Similar with the results in children and adolescents, in terms of top 5 food sources of energy in adults, elderly, pregnant women, and lactating mothers, again, rice was the top food source of total energy intake. So please note the 3-in-1 coffee was included as the top food source of energy in all these groups except pregnant women. So after energy, now let's proceed to the protein intake and adequacy across population groups. So protein has many roles in our body. It helps repair and build the body's tissues, allows metabolic reactions to take place, and coordinates bodily functions. So this slide shows that 7 out of 10 young children and school children met the recommended protein requirement. So protein inadequacy was most notable among pregnant and lactating women, with only 17.2% of pregnant women and 19% of lactating women meeting the recommended protein intake. Okay, so this aggregated by age groups. So 4 out of 10 infants 6 to 11 months, or 43.7%, met the protein requirements. while 7 out of 10 young children 1 to 2 years old and 8 out of 10 3 to 5 years old met the protein requirement respectively. So now let's take a look at the food sources of protein intake. Okay, so as we can see in the slide, rice was the top food source of protein intake among children and adolescents. Though protein content in rice is low, but since it is the staple food of the Filipinos and taking in large amounts, hence it is the top source of protein. So aside from rice, milk was included as a top food source of protein among children 6 months to 5 years old. And among school-age children and adolescents, so aside from rice, pork, chicken egg, chicken meat, and hot dog were included in the top source of protein. Okay, so similar to children and adults, rice was a top food source of protein intake among adults, elderly, pregnant women, and lactating mother. So protein, pork, chicken egg, chicken meat, and fish like tilapia and galunggong were included in the top source of protein. Okay, so now let's take a look at the percent of nutrient contribution to the total mean energy intake. So as we can see in the slide, the main source of energy across population groups was from carbohydrates, okay, followed by fats, and then protein. So let's proceed with the micronutrient inadequacy across population groups. So the micronutrient inadequacy were computed using the estimated average requirements or EAR cutoff point method. So the population groups with intake below the EAR for a given nutrient were considered to be inadequate. So let's start with the proportion of population groups with inadequate dietary intake of vitamin A based on estimated average requirements or EAR. So as we can see in the slide, a high prevalence of vitamin A inadequacy across population groups, particularly among school children 10 to 12 years old, adolescents 13 to 15 years old, and elderly. So intake of dietary health or food supplements again were not accounted in the analysis. Okay, so for vitamin C, so this slide shows that there was a high prevalence of vitamin C inadequacy across age group except among young children 1 to 2 years old. Okay, for iron, the results showed that there was a high prevalence of iron inadequacy across population groups. So take note that again in this study, we only accounted the iron intake from the food and beverages consumed by individuals. Okay, so for calcium, this slide shows a high prevalence of calcium inadequacy was noted across population groups. So as we can see in the graph, adult and elderly had the highest prevalence of calcium inadequacy while young children had the least. For thiamine, so this slide shows that across age groups, a high prevalence of thiamine inadequacy in a diet was noted. Elderly had the highest prevalence of thiamine inadequacy while young children had the least. Okay, so for riboflavin, so the slide shows that there was a high prevalence of riboflavin inadequacy across age groups. So pregnant women had the highest prevalence of riboflavin inadequacy while young children had the least. Okay. So for niacin, so this is the only nutrient with the lowest prevalence of inadequacy, having less than 42% of the population not meeting the niacin requirement per day. So rice is a staple food of Filipinos, which is a major contributor to niacin. However, majority of young children 6 to 11 months and 1 to 2 years old children had inadequate niacin intake due to low intake of other sources of niacin like meat, poultry, liver, and legumes. So generally, the diet of young children 6 to 11 months and 1 to 2 years old children is not yet varied as the diet of other age groups. Okay, now I'm going to present the major food sources of micronutrient in the diet of the different population groups. Okay, so the slide shows that among children and adolescents, we can see in the slide that milk, chicken egg, chicken liver, and pork liver are the key food sources of vitamin A in the diet of children and adolescents. Note that fruits and vegetables, which are good sources of vitamin A, were lacking in the list of top food sources of vitamin A in children and adolescents. Looking at the food sources of vitamin A in adults, elderly, pregnant, and lactating mothers, so a similar result was observed in school children and adolescents, wherein pork liver, chicken liver, and chicken egg were included in the top food source of vitamin A. But again, fruits and vegetables were missing in the list of the top food sources of vitamin A, except for malunggay, wherein it was included in the top 5 sources of vitamin A intake in elderly. Now, let's take a look at the top 5 food sources of vitamin C. So the results show that for young children, milk was included in the top contributors of vitamin C. We can also observe in the slide that banana saba was included in the top food source among children and adolescents. So malunggay and Indian mango, which is known as a good source of vitamin C, was included as one of the main sources of vitamin C in school children and adolescents. Okay, we're looking at the food sources of vitamin C in adults, elderly, pregnant, and lactating mothers. So the slide shows that malunggay, banana saba, taro, or gabi leaves were included in the top 5 food sources of vitamin C in adults, elderly, pregnant, and lactating mothers. Okay. Now let's take a look at the top 5 food sources of iron. The results show that among children and adolescents, rice is the top food source of iron. So we know that the amount of iron in rice, especially well-milled rice, is fairly low. But since there was a great consumption of rice, it became the top food source of iron. Aside from rice, milk were also included in the top food source of iron among young children. Other major food sources of iron, as shown in the slide, include processed meat, lean meat, chicken eggs, chocolate-flavored drink, and pandesal. Okay, so in terms of the food sources of iron in adults, elderly, pregnant, and lactating mothers, so as we can see in the slide, the results show that rice and pandesal were included in the top food source of iron. Heme iron from animal sources, which is a good source of iron, like chicken, egg, and pork lean, were included in the top food source of iron. But fish, which is another source of iron, was not included in the top food source, while the non-heme iron from plant sources were also missing in the top 5 food sources of iron in these groups. Okay, so now let's take a look at the top 5 food sources of calcium. So among young children, milk was the top food source of calcium because they are consumed in large amount. For school children and adolescents, rice is the primary source of calcium, again because rice was most consumed than milk and milk products. So canned sardines also belong to the top food sources. They are also rich in calcium. Okay, so looking at the food sources of calcium in adults, elderly, pregnant, and lactating mothers, so this slide shows that again, rice is the primary source of calcium since it is the staple food among Filipinos. Milk, sardines, dried dilis, and malunggay were also included in the top food source of calcium. Okay, so in summary, cereal and cereal products contributed the most to the Filipino diet, majority of which were rice and rice products. The mean energy intake of all age groups was inadequate based on the recommendations. So protein inadequacy was most notable among pregnant and lactating women. More than 90% of adolescents and adults have inadequacies of calcium, iron, and vitamin C. Okay, so iron was the least met micronutrient in the diet of all population groups, while niacin was the most met. Rice remains the top food source of energy, iron and calcium in all population groups, excluding the intakes of young children where the primary source was from milk and milk products. Pork liver and chicken liver were included in the top sources of vitamin A in all population groups. The top food sources of vitamin C in all population groups were malunggay leaves and banana saba, excluding the young children, where the primary source was from milk and milk products. Okay, so that's end my presentation. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, thank you po kay Ma'am Josie for that lecture. So before we go on po to the question and answer portion for the participant, I'd like to acknowledge for our speakers who are present with us in this meeting room. So we have po Ms. Lilibet Dasco. Yan. Ms. Lilibet Dasco and Ma'am Josie po. Kasama po natin sila today. So we are now ready to take your questions since our resource speaker are all here po. So do you have any questions po from the participant? Okay, so we have a question po from Sir Norman of QMMC. Okay, let me unmute po, sir. Can I ask po Ma'am Josie and Ma'am Beth to please open your video so that I can pin you po sa ating... Okay, thank you po Ma'am Beth. Okay. Okay, Ma'am, Sir Norman, can you ask your question na po? Thank you po.
Opo, good morning po. Ayan. So may ang tanong ko po, based on the data on ENNS, do you think it's positive or a negative outcome po? And why po?
Outcome po specifically for what po, sir?
Yung as a whole po. As a whole of the,
okay. As the whole food result ng ENNS.
Yes.
Okay. Ma'am Beth? Thank you po, Sir Norman. Ma'am.
Pwede po ulit ng tanong? Medyo na ako.
Okay. Tinatanong po ni Sir Norman, Ma'am Beth, if yung result daw po ng ENNS natin is overall po ba is a positive result or a negative result po ng ating nutritional situation po?
Kasi generally merong mga positive and meron ding mga negative. So hindi natin masabi na there are some aspects na positive siya. In a way, makita mo naman dun sa results ng indiv and the household. May mga nutrients tayo na kahit papaano na-meet naman nung ating mga Filipino population. So, meron din naman na, pero mostly kasi yung mga nutrients ay inadequate siya. So, nakikita natin na talagang diet alone could not really, yung hindi siya enough na ma-solve yung ating problema sa micronutrient deficiency. Kasi maraming mga factors na naka-affect sa ating intake, no? So hindi natin marami tayong mga iba't ibang strategy para masugpo itong ating mga deficiencies. So meron tayong micronutrient supplementation, isa yan sa mga paraan para kahit papano we will be able to meet yung ating requirement. So isa lang yon sa paraan. So pwede rin tayong mag-take ng mga supplements, isa rin yan sa paraan. So maraming mga factors. Si Miss Josie baka merong may idagdag.
Okay po, thank you po Ma'am Beth. Ma'am Josie po.
Okay. So good morning po sa ating lahat. So makikita po natin na medyo mababa talaga yung sa mga micronutrient intake po natin. So ang isang way para in addition sa sinabi ni Ma'am Lilibet Dasco, so ang isang way ay magtanim. So dapat talaga ay magtanim tayo ng fruits and vegetables, lalo na ngayon na may pandemic. So kita naman natin sa mga age groups, kulang talaga so lack talaga ang fruits and vegetables sa mga food sources, sa top food sources ng vitamin at saka other micronutrients sa contribution sa pagkain ng mga sa lahat ng age group. So green leafy vegetables, so napakahalaga niyan. So dapat talaga ay magtanim tayo. So isa 'yon sa way natin para tayo para mas gumanda yung nutritional status natin. Okay.
Okay po, thank you po Ma'am Josie. So tamang-tama po yung mga participant po natin ngayon is mostly from DepEd and TA, mga agriculturists kasama po natin. So may isa pa pong question dito, I think this is for Miss Josie po. What is the cutoff point for the percent inadequacy for the micronutrients po?
So ang ginagamit natin sa mga micronutrients, 'di ba? Sa energy ay recommended energy intake. So sa sa mga micronutrients naman, based sa PDRI ay 100%. So estimated average requirement, so 100% din.
Okay po, so Ma'am Josie, if ang na-compute pong adequacy is 98%, kasama pa rin po sila sa inadequacy po.
At least na-meet na nila, at least malapit sila.
Okay po, pero okay. At least malapit, pero dun po sa data natin is 100% and above po. Okay po. Thank you po, Ma'am Josie. Next po, meron pong question dito. I think si Ma'am Beth po dito, no? Nag-survey pa rin po ba daw ngayon? And what are the current challenges in the current survey given the pandemic po?
Okay, sa ngayon po kasi sabi natin 'di ba 3-year rolling survey. So nag-start tayo nung 2018, yan yung first year, and then yung second year natin nung 2019. Supposed to be nung 2020 will be the third year. Yan yung remaining 37 provinces. Yun nga lang dahil nagka-pandemic, nung March 15 na-suspend ang ating data collection, kaya tinigil namin. Then after that, nung 2021, this year, nag-continue kami. Pero yung pag-continue namin, hindi yung kung saan kami tumigil na provinces, yun lang yung tinapos lang yon. So talagang inulit namin lahat ng probinsya, yung 37 provinces. So sa ngayon, anong tawag dito, yung may mga teams kami na nagtutulungan sa ngayon, nasa Surigao del Norte, meron sa Batangas, meron sa Ifugao, and sa Negros Occidental, and may Bohol. So yun yung remaining provinces na kino-cover sa ngayon kasi nag-start lang kami nung July dahil medyo lumuwag na ng konti yung classification, yung COVID risk classification. Kaya hindi na namin natapos yung 37 provinces. So more or less mga 19 provinces lang ngayon ang tinatapos namin until December 16. And then we will continue covering yung 18 provinces sa first quarter of next year. So yung mga challenges marami, no? So yung una yung you have to comply with all the requirements, yung travel requirements bago ka makapasok sa isang probinsya. So merong mga IATF guidelines, then you have to follow yung protocol. And then may mga cases din kami na may mga researchers na na-expose sa COVID-19. So kailangan sila i-isolate. And then yung na-expose naman, yung meron talaga nagkaroon ng COVID-19, so na-isolate sila. And then for 14 days. And then yung iba naman na-expose doon sa may mga COVID positive. No, so either nakasalamuhan nila sa on the way, no, sa pag-travel nila, yung driver mismo, or yung respondent So kaya na quarantine naman sila. So 14 days din yon. So yun yung medyo challenging na pag-conduct ng survey namin for this year. This is the last leg supposed to be kasi ang remaining 19 will be covered, ay 18 pala, will be covered sa first quarter of next year. So sana po suportahan nyo po kami kasi ang aming survey hindi siya magiging successful kung wala po ang tulong ng ating LGUs, napakahalaga po yon. And then yung participation din ng ating mga households na kasali sa survey. So yun yung inaano namin, hinihingi ang inyong suporta sa aming survey. Maraming salamat po.
So in addition kay sa sinabi ni Ma'am Lilibet Dasco, so ang challenges talaga, so ang isa pang challenges, so sabi nga ni Ma'am, dapat sumunod kami sa protocol ng LGU. So may mga LGUs talaga, ang gusto nila ay, ang requirement nila ay negative sa RT-PCR test. So lahat, so halimbawa yung team ko ngayon nasa Ifugao sila, so 29 sila ngayon sa Ifugao. So bago sila pumunta mag-transfer sa Ifugao, galing sila sa Apayao, then transfer sila sa Ifugao, kailangan negative ang RT-PCR test nila. So yun talaga yung isang challenge. And then ang isang challenge din yung talagang kailangan magsuot ng aming mga researchers ng PPE, ng protective gear talaga. So yun para sa safety din ng ating mga researchers. Ganon din yung mga ini-interview nila ng mga participants. And then, syempre, ngayong may pandemic, iiwasan talaga natin yung exposure talaga ng ating mga researchers sa mga subjects. Syempre, para hindi ma-expose sa COVID-19. So, katulad sa dietary component, so this year, wala kaming kinoconduct na food weighing. So, syempre, alam naman natin na ang methodology ng food weighing, papasok talaga sa bahay, magko-conduct talaga ng food weighing sa lahat ng mga pagkain na intended na kainin for the whole day. So, hindi yon nagawa dito sa survey na ito. 24-hour food record lang for the all age groups yung kinakonduct sa dietary component. So yun talaga. So more on coordination sa ating mga LGU, sa mga barangay officials, sa mga mayor, sa governor. So marami kaming letters talaga na ginawa at prepare bago talaga mag-conduct nitong survey dahil nga dito sa ating pandemic. So thank you very much.
Celine, nakamute ka.
Okay po. So thank you po Ma'am Beth and Ma'am Josie. Tamang-tama po, madami po tayong participant ng mga R&Ds dito from all over the country po. So yung sinabi po ni Ma'am Beth na tulungan po tayo with regards sa data collection. So maganda din pong platform po ito na mapaalam po natin yung current challenges po with regards sa survey. Siguro after nito, Ma'am Beth, Ma'am Josie, maganda magkaroon din tayo ng forum on conducting survey during the pandemic para magkaroon tayo ng insights kung paano po ito nagawa ni FNRI, especially during this time po. Okay? And saludo po tayo sa lahat ng researcher po ng FNRI na talagang tinatawid po lahat ng bundok, lahat ng dagat para lang po makapag-gather ng data. Alam ko po madami po sa participant ngayon ang naging researcher din po ng DOST-FNRI. Okay po. Ma'am, mayroon po tayong question from DA po, si Sir Francis po from Department of Agri. In terms of cereals and cereal product plate waste, it is more prevalent in urban than rural areas. So may data po ba tayo on plate waste po, Ma'am Josie, Ma'am Beth po? Hello po?
So ma'am, meron po tayong data ng plate waste. So ang ibig sabihin po kasi natin ng plate waste, ito po yung mga edible pa, pwede pang kainin pero natitira sa plato after po kumain. So ito po ay nasasayang. So karamihan po talaga ay nasa urban urban dwellers ang mataas po ang plate waste natin. So mostly sa NCR at saka ito po sa mga urban areas po.
Okay po. So may follow-up question po si Sir Francis. Department of Agriculture is now promoting rabbit meat. What are your insight on this in terms of meeting the nutritional needs of Filipinos po? Ma'am Beth, Ma'am Josie.
So Ma'am Beth, nakamute po kayo.
Okay, hello. Binabasa ko kasi yung iba pang mga questions. So anyway, yung program ng DA ba yun? Sorry ha.
DA po. DA po.
Oo. Kasi yung ano natin, ina-advocate natin sana na talagang para magiging food secure tayo ay sabi nga kanina ni Josie, no, magtanim tayo sa ating mga bakuran. Kasi once na magtanim tayo, parang fresh siya from farm to table. Parang ganun siya, from the garden to the table. So fresh pa yung mga fruits and vegetables. And magkaroon tayo ng mga innovative ways ng pagluto. Kasi minsan kung yung usual lang din yung niluluto natin, parang hindi siya ganun ka-attractive sa mga bata lalo na, no? And kasi ang ating kakumpetensya sa ngayon yung mga proliferation ng ating mga fast food chains, kasi yon talaga masyadong very attractive sa yung ating consuming public. So para maging ano siya, maging malasa at attractive din, dapat may mga innovative ways tayo. So meron kasi ang yung FNRI, no, nung mga iba't ibang recipes dun sa mga calendar din namin na pinamimigay. So marami po 'yun, pwede po 'yun magamit natin, no? Even yung ating mga ano tawag dito, yung mga iba-ibang gulay na mga talagang minsan yun lang yung available lang talaga siya sa bawat probinsya. Minsan hindi siya nakikita sa, kung andito siya sa part ng Luzon, hindi siya nakikita sa Visayas or Mindanao, or kung meron din ang Mindanao na unique lang talaga sa kanila. So yun, yung ano natin, no, na maging innovative lang tayo sa ating pagluto. And then marami din tayong mga, 'di ba, sa social media, yung mga iba't ibang platforms, merong mga cooking show sila or may mga iba't ibang impormasyon, pwede nyo po yun you take that opportunity para po madagdagan po ang inyong kaalaman. And talagang we encourage na magtanim kasi yun yung way na maibsan natin yung ating mga inadequacies, no, sa nutrient inadequacies. Kasi yun available na siya dun sa ating garden, diretso na sa ating kusina, no? So iluluto mo na lang, hindi mo na bibilhin. And then very fresh pa kasi yung nutrient losses, no? Kahit na marami ka rin kinakain, minsan yung nutrient losses sa pag-transport ng ating mga gulay, yung nutrient losses nag-occur dyan, minsan sa pag-prepare ng pagkain bago mo iluto, so may mga nawawala din dyan. And then pag nailuto mo rin, may mga nawawala. Kaya nagkakaroon tayo ng nutrient inadequacy. No? So yun yung para maiwasan natin yun, kung meron tayong sariling atin na garden sa backyard garden, pwede mo nang pitasin yan at diretsong iluto. Manamis na miss pa po yung gulay pagka yun ang galing sa ating sariling garden. So kung maging masipag lang po tayo, yun po yung talagang way na kahit papano maiwasan yung sabi natin mga nutrient inadequacy. So okay. Yun po.
So regarding naman po sa question kanina regarding doon sa rabbit meat, okay? So actually ang rabbit meat, ang pagkain ng rabbit, so hindi siya pangkaraniwan, di ba? So ang pangkaraniwan sa atin pork, beef, yan ang goat, minsan horse, di ba? Pero lalo yung chicken, no? Pero isa sa alternative way, so may napanood nga akong isang documentary na talagang pwede naman kainin talaga yung rabbit meat. Di ba? Edible naman talaga siya. So in terms of promoting rabbit meat, so kung meron naman talaga, meron naman supply ng rabbit meat at mura, kung mas mura siya, why not? Pwede naman talaga natin siyang alternative sa ating mga meat products.
Okay po. Thank you po, Ma'am Beth, Ma'am Josie. I think last question na lang po. Meron lang po nagtanong dito. Will there be someone in Congress or Senate that will advocate or empower in making nutrition policy and budgeting? So, I guess nasa, di ba sa LGU po ito, Ma'am Josie, Ma'am Beth?
So, ang alam ko dyan sa national, di ba, Ma'am Beth, si Secretary, Cabinet Secretary natin, si Nograles, siya yung pinaka-chairman po ng Zero Hunger, di po ba? So, international level, meron naman po talagang ginagawa na way na para ma-implement, para masugpo itong malnutrition, so para mas maganda ang nutritional status, and then down to LGU talaga. So, tama po kayo, ma'am, na talagang dapat din at the lower level sa ating mga LGU, dapat talaga din ma-promote talaga yung itong na maging maganda ang nutritional status ng mga na nating lahat. So halimbawa, if ever na mag-consult ang isang pregnant or lactating women sa health center, so ito na yung way, ito na yung parang dapat maging responsible ang ating mga BNS, BHW, ang ating mga health workers, ang mga midwives sa pagtuturo o nutrition education. So, diyan papasok yung yung kanilang expertise sa nutrition education, ano ba ang dapat kainin, ano ba ang dapat gawin, ano ba ang dapat iwasan ng ating mga pregnant, lactating women, hindi lang sila, pati mga elderly, lahat ng age group. So, pati sa mga bata, ano ang dapat nilang kainin, anong dapat iwasan para, and then healthy lifestyle din. So, mag-exercise, physical activity, dagdagan ng physical activity. So, down to LGU talaga ang pinakamabisa talaga na solution para gumanda ang nutritional status natin mga Pilipino. Thank you.
Ma'am Beth, mayroon pa po kayong idadagdag?
Yung sa sa Congress and Senate, ang nag-advocate dito or naglalabi yung mga mga nutrition tawag dito, NNC ang nag-head, and even yung pwede ang NDAP and yung iba pang mga private organizations, sila yung naglalabi na mag-sponsor ng isang bill or isang batas, no? So kasi ang mahirap kasi yung nutrition minsan hindi siya ganun ka-attractive unlike dun sa mga ibang mga batas, di ba, yung mga controversial, yung nutrition hindi attractive unlike sa ating mga infrastructure kasi yun nakikita. Ang nutrition nararamdaman lang yon. So yun yung tawag dito? Yun yung paglalabi yung challenge sa sa paglabi ng ating bill tungkol sa mga kalusugan natin, no? So ito nga naalala ko lang yung last week may nilalabi ang yung sa Nueva Ecija, ano ba ito? Yung counterpart ng Erie.
Philippine rice.
Yung Phil rice. So meron silang golden rice. Kasi nakita natin ang vitamin A deficiency talagang mataas sa mga bata. Kahit na meron tayong mga vitamin A patak, lalo na ngayon nagka-pandemic, so medyo na antala 'yon. So may nilalabi sila para may mag-sponsor na isang na mga congressman. So inuna muna nila yung Catanduanes. So yung congressman sa Catanduanes, and mabuti naman, very interested yung congressman kasi doon i-test sa Catanduanes yung golden rice. Kasi matagal ito bago nabuo talaga yung kasi pinag-aralan nila. So ang pagsasaliksik nito ay napakatagal. So nung nito na magte-test na sila ngayon sa Catanduanes, ito yung first province na mabigyan ng ma-realize itong golden rice. So yan yung sa vitamin A, kung paano natin masugpo ang vitamin A. So yun yung ina-advocate ng field rice sa ngayon. So yan, so marami pang mga batas na pwede nating mailabi doon sa Congress. Ang ano lang doon, yung talagang makita natin yung passion ng isang congressman na maano niya, no, na maisulong niya itong batas na ito, no. So may mga ganon, challenging lang talaga sa ngayon ang paglabi ng ating mga batas na ukol sa nutrisyon at kalusugan. So yun po.
Thank you po, Ma'am Beth. And to add lang, Ma'am Beth, may mga progress na din naman tayo with regards sa law, lalo na with the F1K law po, yung first 1,000 days law, and the Nutrition and Dietetics law po of 2016. So, ano naman po, little steps po, pero we're getting there po. And also, sa mga local government unit po, meron po mga local government codes or memo na nagsasabi po na kailangan po silang mag-alat ng budget po para po sa nutrition programs po natin sa municipality level. So, meron po tayong mga in place. Yun po. Okay, and to acknowledge po, kasama din po natin dito si Dr. Eva Guyena. Good morning, Ma'am Beng. Okay po, good morning po. Ayan. So, may questions pa po ba tayo from our participants? So, I hope po we enlighten you po with the result po of our dietary survey po, and also na sobrang ano din po yung updates po nila, Ma'am Beth, regarding sa conduct po ng ENNS, especially during this pandemic po, yung mga challenges po na nakaharap po natin sa ngayon. So may questions pa po tayo. So if wala na po, let's all give a virtual clap po to all our speakers. Ma'am Lilibet Dasco, Dr. Eva Guyena, and Ma'am Josie Desnacido for their lectures po on the Dissemination Forum po on ENNS 2018 and 2019 po. Thank you po for joining us, and thank you po for your time po to answers po all the questions po ng ating mga participant. Maraming salamat po, mga ma'am. Thank you po. So with that po, let me share my screen for our last question po. Yan. Na sasagutin po ng ating mga participant. Okay. So, yung lecture po ni Ma'am Josie, maganda po yun, no? Especially sa mga DepEd teachers natin, na nakita natin doon na yung top 5 na kinakain ng school children sa lahat ng age group na from energy sources ay sila lang yung may hotdog na may kasamang hotdog sa meal. So it tells us po talaga na more into processed food po yung kinakain po ng as form of energy source po ng ating mga school age children. So pwede po natin gamitin to para ma-encourage po yung ating mga students to eat more healthy. Okay, so for our last question po, yan. So based on the lecture po of Ma'am Josie, what is the least met micronutrient in the diet of all the population groups? Yan. Sino po ang mag-raise hand? Ayan, may nag-raise hand na si Ma'am Hazel Albor. Ma'am Hazel, maybe si Miss Jane can unmute you po. Yes,
Hello,
Ma'am
ma'am.
Hazel.
Can you hear me po?
Yes, loud and clear
Opo.
po.
Zinc po ba ito, ma'am?
Hindi po zinc. Hindi po zinc, ma'am. Thank you po for trying. Ano po, nasa summary po kanina ni Ma'am Josie bago po matapos yung kanyang lecture. So, sunod si Ma'am Rhea.
Hi po.
Yes, Ma'am Rhea. Magandang umaga po.
Good morning po.
Yes po. Yes.
Iron po, yung list met micronutrients.
Ayan. Thank you po, Ma'am Rhea. Ma'am Rhea, from what location po sila?
Bukawi, Bulacan po.
From Bulacan. Ano pong profession nila, ma'am?
Dietitian po, ma'am.
Ayan, magandang umaga po sa mga taga Bulacan. Thank you, ma'am. So, ma'am, paki-message na lang po kay Miss Jane Sune po ang inyong details po para po sa inyong 100 peso loan.
Okay
so,
po, thank you po.
Thank you po, as mentioned po by Miss Josie. No? So, across all age group po, iron po ang pinaka-less met micronutrient po sa ating Filipino population. Okay po. So with that po, dyan po natatapos ang ating third day ng ating Rewind series. Again po, we will read po a few reminders po to guide you on how to get your certificate po. So again, please provide your PRC ID number and PRC ID expiration date in your iTrain accounts. Okay, please also edit your name in the account. Please note that the name you enter in the account will be reflected in your certificates. Okay, again po, we remind you to please accomplish the attendance sheet provided in the Zoom chat box. And please accomplish po the attendance sheet and provide the correct email address or the same email address you use in the IFNRI or iTrain registration. If you fail to provide the correct and same email address, the system will not be able to process your certificate. Again, you have until 12 noon to accomplish the attendance sheet. The certificate for this 4-day DOST-FNRI webinar series Rewind will be given on a per session basis. Thus, you need to answer the process and evaluation form per session. So per session po, again, pagbibigay natin ng certificate. So wala po tayong isang overall certificate na ibibigay para sa lahat. Okay? You may start answering the post-test and evaluation form at 1 o'clock p.m. via the iTrain website. So just click the profile button and answer the post-test and evaluation. If your profession is a nutritionist dietitian, if you're NT po, we are given po 6 CPD units by the PRC, so that corresponds po to 1.5 unit per session. You can download automatically your certificate from the iTrain website after answering the post-test and evaluation form. For all po, para sa lahat ng umattend po, para po makareceive tayo ng certificate, you need to register via the iTrain before the start of the webinar and answer the pre-test before the start of the webinar. So registration and answering the pre-test, you need to answer the attendance sheet link given during the webinar, answer post-test and evaluation form also via the iTrain website. Okay. For other professions po, please do not download certificates from the iTrain website because it will not bear the correct units for your profession. It will also not bear the correct PRC accreditation number for this webinar. Thus, we will email you your certificate. Please give us 14 days to send your certificate. So, for professional teachers, we are granted 12 units by PRC, chemistry units, agriculture 20 units, Chem-Eng 4 units, midwifery 10 units, and medtech 3 units. Okay, so thank you po for attending our third session. We hope to see you all po to our last session po tomorrow. This is our fourth day na po natin and last session po natin. Again, we remind you that the iTrain website is only accessible via desktop and laptops. And The webinar passcode for all the webinars being shown by iTrain is DOST-FNRI po. So thank you po for attending and see you all tomorrow po for our last session. Thank you.
Everything today is faster. Everything today is easier. With technology getting better, it doesn't mean we're getting healthier. While the kids are young, while the parents are working, while the stress is tough, just remember the following. Go for a daily dose of nutrition. A balanced meal with variation. A run or two of exercise. Aim for healthy lifestyles. Inspire others to do the same. The story of life is no game. Life doesn't need to end that fast. If you choose health, the longer you last. Go for a daily dose of nutrition. A balanced meal with variation. A run or two of exercise. Aim for healthy lifestyles. Go for a daily dose of nutrition. A balanced meal with variation. A run or two of exercise. Aim for healthy lifestyle. Live longer, happier, better with FNRI.
Ang awiting ito'y gabay sa Pilipino para sa gustong nutrisyon, kalusugan natin.